Guys, we are winning. Our pushback is finally working, and the government is saying they are going to cut immigration, and not just temporary foreign workers, not just the fraud, but they said PRs as well, and they realized they are losing Canadian support coast to coast, and the mainstream media is catching up on this as well, because what they've done is they've brought on people now who have talked about the fraud, which we're going to get into today. They're pushing back at the liberal ministers on the stuff that they're saying, and they're saying, you said this previously. Some of the stuff even said by the liberal ministers in today's video is stuff we were saying about immigration forever ago that we were getting attacked for. I couldn't believe the stuff discussed in today's videos, but let's get into it.
It could be one of the biggest policy reversals for Justin Trudeau in his time as Prime Minister. The Liberals now open to reducing the number of permanent residents admitted to Canada every year.
We're looking at the various streams to make sure that as we move forward, Canada remains a place that is positive in its support for immigration.
The Fed set a target each year for the number of people who can get PR, and it has absolutely exploded under the Liberals. 296,000 people were given PR in Canada back in 2016. Now that number is up to 500,000 each year in 2025 and 2026, a 59% increase. But it's not just PR. The Liberals did announce that they are cutting back on the number of workers who are allowed to come into Canada temporarily for low-wage jobs, and are also looking at reducing the number of high-skilled temporary workers.
I've heard from provincial premiers, I've heard from my colleagues' counterparts in other provinces, I've heard directly from Canadians about where they see the direction of immigration going, and I think they're asking us to adjust. So the number of options that we'll be looking at, and it's not set in stone yet.
Changing the direction on policy out of political necessity, the Liberals floundering the polls down anywhere between 15 and 20 points to the Conservatives, but they're still standing behind the Prime Minister.
So that's what's been really big about this, because they realize they can only get in with Canadian support. And this isn't like they just instantly had this epiphany. They've known this is a problem for years, and that's why it's crazy to see the language changing. Again, not just for PR, they're talking about TFW, they're talking about everything that falls under the immigration umbrella. It has been a 180 that I did not think that we were going to see. And again, hopefully this is still too late for them to get Canadian support. And we are hopefully going to see a change in leadership, because I don't want to look at this guy's face any more than I have to. I wanted to show you that. It's a quick little update in the discussions that have been happening in the last day or so. But this part of the actual statement is what I found more interesting. Let's listen to the words he says here. He says multiple very important things that we used to get attacked for saying.
Clarify, what is the trajectory that the government wants to bring numbers down to? Is it pre-pandemic levels? You know, we've seen so much talk about how the line has gone up much faster in population growth since the pandemic. So are you trying to bring it back down to the pace of growth that's pre-pandemic or something in between? Can you give us a sense of the goal?
Well, look, I think fundamentally we're dealing with a conundrum that the Bank of Canada has itself laid out quite clearly. We have seen significant growth in the economy that is due almost solely to immigration in the last few years, and that entrance into the workforce driven almost entirely by immigrants and immigration. This is
Okay, he's about to say something that I disagree with, but did you hear that? He basically said the Bank of Canada is admitting, and they are admitting, that all of our GDP growth has been due to immigration. That's bad. That's very, very bad. That means we have no productivity. We are just bringing in people. And think of it as printing government money. So instead of our banks, the central bank printing money as stimulus, we've been using immigration as stimulus. But it's not just about money, because there's other things that are affected in Canada, which he mentions. That's not just about money when you start to bring in people and not just dollars. But this is where I disagree with him.
This is a good thing. The IMF has said time and time again that we have avoided recession thanks to immigration, but it's come with a conundrum in and around affordability, in and around housing, and making sure we adjust that properly is something that every Canadian expects us to do, and not be dogmatic about it. As I took this,
the conundrum of not wanting to go into a recession was, now we have an affordability crisis. Well, that doesn't sound like a better scenario to me personally. A better scenario would have been invest in productivity, invest in workers, have us rebuild through a recession so that we would have a better foundation that would help us grow. But hey, let's just do the Band-Aid solution by bringing over millions of people, which is obviously going to do what he says later, which I couldn't believe he said this.
This position, I told people that I'm not someone that is beholden to any form of dogmatism, very open to making changes if the economy dictates it, if the social fabric dictated it.
What?
And so I've heard from provincial.
The social fabric dictated it. That is something that conservatives, average Canadians, people walking on the street have been saying for years. We are seeing demographic changes, and these people are not assimilating. There's a breakdown in the social fabric. These freaks have been calling us all sorts of ists and phobes for years as we've said this. He now just said it. The Liberal Minister of Immigration just said it himself. It's on the table, guys.
Premiers, I've heard from my colleagues, counterparts in other provinces. I've heard directly from Canadians about where they see the direction of immigration going. And I think they're asking us to adjust. So the number of options that we'll be looking at, and it's not set in stone yet, Marika, at Cabinet in the next few weeks, will include a very, very robust discussion about where we think we should be going in the next 3 years as we set those level plans and respond to the criticism that we've legitimately gotten from different sectors of society, which is to give a fuller picture of the temporary residential picture of Canada, because we know that a lot of those people that are becoming permanent residents are already here, and that impacts the analyses that are made by the Bank of Canada as they adjust and fixed interest rates, and giving them some clarity on that is key.
I just wanted to show his statement on those because he said those two huge things, and he's about to be grilled by the press in one of the next videos that we have. But before we get into that, we have this gentleman who's an immigration consultant talking about everything that we've been saying on this channel, which again, I've been called names for, I've been yelled at, I've been told that I can't get sponsors for my channel for saying these things. And here we go, look at this.
And you say that some of this rise in office jobs could be fraud. People coming in, they really want to move to Canada, and they're paying an employer to pretend to employ them?
Absolutely, Andrew. This is the worst kept secret in immigration, that, these positions and the labor market impact assessment document, the LMIA, which an employer needs to hire these foreign workers. I mean, everyone knows that, these LMIAs are for sale. I'm not saying all LMIAs are for sale. I'm not saying all employers indulge in these activities. But I mean, there is definitely a marketplace which exists out there where these LMIAs can be bought and sold. And a lot of these positions, these entry-level office positions that you see, administrative assistants.
Have you liked the video yet? It's a small click for you, but it helps get these videos in front of more people. And as you can see from today's video, the groundswell support is helping change what the government is doing. If you like what we talk about here, feel free to subscribe. Back to the video.
Even if you just think about it, I mean, really, can employers not find administrative assistants across Canada? In 2023, about 3,000 to 3,300 of these positions for administrative assistants were approved, which means that, temporary foreign workers were hired instead of Canadian permanent residents and citizens. Were employers really having difficulty finding administrative assistants? So it just simply doesn't make sense. And anyone who inside or outside of immigration can maybe, will be able to see that there's perhaps more going on in the background. So yes, absolutely, these positions are bought and sold, and, everyone within immigration and outside of immigration is aware that this is going on.
Hear that? That's from an immigration consultant saying everybody involved knows that the fraud is actively happening. And we obviously did a bunch of videos on this already. And it's crazy that, we have to be the ones as average citizens calling out the administration saying like, hey guys, there's fraud going on. You're doing things wrong. But as we've seen, it has started to work, which is good. And guess who's catching on to that? The mainstream media. And our girl Vassie started to push back at Mark here about some of his statements and the PR numbers, and she gives him a kind of a hard time, and I like to see it.
Staying there for the next 2 years. Can you expand on what kind of things your government is considering? Are you considering, very bluntly, a reduction in permanent immigration?
Well, we're looking at a number of options. When I paused the levels last year, it was with an undertaking to talk to Canadians and see what those levels look like or should be. There has been significant growth, I think for good reason, in the last few years. That economic growth, again, has been indispensable in making sure that the gross domestic product of the country has grown, that the entrance into the workforce, all driven by immigration, was assured. But now it's time to take a look at them and put real.
I'm not going to let them get away with that talking point. Every single time they say that we needed immigration to push GDP, I'm going to call it out. It was bad. It did not help. Basically, it's substance abuse through immigration to keep GDP alive when they should have let us rebuild, like I said, economically.
Real options on the table for the Prime Minister and for other cabinet ministers to look at, and not cosmetic changes simply to deal with public opinion. Real significant change to make sure that we have an immigration.
What does that mean? What does significant
you'll see
change
when we
mean?
announce the levels. It's not something I would announce publicly, particularly without having had that discussed in cabinet. It has not had the full, robust cabinet discussion that is due to it, and I expect to hear from my cabinet colleagues who are sometimes of different positions and views as to what the immigration levels of the country look like. So when I say all options are on the table, there will be considerations about whether we reduce, what type of immigration that we are supporting. 60% of our immigration is economically driven. That is probably unprecedented with countries that we compare ourselves to. But we have to see if we've done this in the right way, and if that growth merits to continue, needs to be paused or even reduced.
Do any of those colleagues by any chance end up on that list of foreign interference, the treason list that we've kind of brushed over, that there are ministers actively there who are campaigning on behalf of other countries? Are those the colleagues you're going to listen to?
Why is that the conversation happening right now? And I ask with respect specifically to permanent, because every interview I've conducted with you or the housing minister over the last year, you have been very insistent that what was driving the ills associated with immigration was on the temporary side of things. And I even remember in January asking you this question about the permanent stream, and you said questions in that, you were kind of hearing a lot of questions in that area, and some of them had undertones of racism. That is the way that your government pushed back against questions about permanent residency. And now, at one of the most politically vulnerable times for your party, you're willing to look at cutting those numbers. Is that why?
Well, no, look, I'm not going to presume that racism doesn't exist, but there are legitimate views within Canadian society of people I would never think of calling
Could your
racist.
government have been more entertaining to those views previously?
Well, I think we should always be open to these points of views. The conversations that I have, for example, around the Easter table, Christmas table, they're different views. Some people have a different view on immigration than I do. This is a country that has largely benefited and built an amazing consensus around immigration.
Ruh-roh, Spaghetti-O called out for your ists and phobes overuse. Well, and shout out to Vasi for saying that. And then, he goes to say, we're a nation of immigrants, built on immigrants. Yes, controlled immigration for specific industries and needs over time. Yeah, we absolutely were. Not fraud, not mass immigration. That's not what it was. So her saying, well, this is a view that you guys used to say was racist. What's changed? Now it's okay to say, shout out to Vasi. Got to give her retupect, baby.
But again, we're hearing from different parts of Canada, different even people in my own family that have different views on immigration. I think we owe it as a responsible government to listen to them, even if we don't.
Did you not owe it a year ago or a year and a half ago when those levels were hitting 450,000, 500,000?
Well, they haven't hit 500,000. This year we will be at 485. There has been some aggressive growth, I think with good reason. And those people are productive members of the economy, productive members of society. But I think as a responsible country in the current context that we're facing, we have to look at those levels and say, do we continue along those lines? Or do we look at it and say, where can we best rationalize things? Where can we have a sustainable level within the levels that we see with the other countries of the OECD? And have a conversation that's devoid of racism, but also reflective of what different people are thinking. Both people from diasporas that we've brought in, but also Canadians that have been here perhaps a little longer. And I think that is that's what Canadians expect to hear.
And when's that decision?
So that's funny too. Those people from diaspora that we've brought in, yeah, because even the immigrants who you've brought in are we got too many of them immigrants. Get them out of here. And it's you just showed up 6 weeks ago. It's too many, man. I don't want them in my neighborhood. And it's okay, man, sure.
Decision coming. Will that be in the report coming this fall? You'll put out another plan?
So when I announced every year we announce the levels and I deposit a report in front of Parliament. What I've done this year, contrary to other years, is to fold in the temporary levels, which often does get confused with the permanent levels, and often we get criticized for not integrating the temporary levels, which have jumped in the past year. And I think one of the reasons we focus...
Past 2 years.
One of the reasons that we focus so heavily on temporary migration is because of the significant jumps that we've seen in the student cohorts, in the postgraduate work permit cohorts, and saying that certainly needs to get it under control. It's been overheated, but we're not excluding other areas as well.
Do you take responsibility for overseeing the system, just final question, that did get overheated? I mean, the permanent levels you set, the temporary levels you did not impose a cap on until this year.
Well, I think every minister needs to take responsibility for the files they're in.
So shout out to him for almost taking accountability there, but shout out to Vasi for pushing back. If you made it this far in the video, you absolutely rock. Thank you. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and have a great rest of your day.